Hello and welcome to Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life. This is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, Johanna. Hey, Johanna.
Hi, Jared.
What are we going to talk about today?
When kids act like they are bored by what you are teaching.
Well, this isn't really a concern. So in the event that this does happen, this is sort of like nuclear power plant is never going to melt down. So we don't really need to learn about what to do if it does. So in the unlikely event that a child does get bored in the classroom, which we know is probably never going to happen, but if it did,
there could be multiple reasons for why it's happening.
A lot of reasons.
This podcast is just going to talk about when they're bored because it turns out they already know what you're teaching.
Okay.
And then we're going to have future podcasts that discuss they don't actually know what you're teaching.
And they're acting bored. Symptoms are similar.
The symptoms are probably the exact same.
Okay.
Right.
So, okay.
We've discussed this a little bit, but we got some feedback that people want us to go more into the weeds on the different types of like bored or lack of engagement issues.
Yep.
So this is us diving deep, people.
All right. So step one, do I know when someone is bored? Like, is that just obvious?
Generally, yes. Because they either create a behavior issue or they send you behavior signals that tell you something is wrong.
All right. So we don't need to explain how to recognize boredom. That one teachers already got.
Yes, it is important
humans.
To distinguish that a kid who's been taught to behave in school will display boredom differently than kids who either haven't been taught or don't care to do what they were taught.
So it can manifest in normal human boredom signals.
Parents who...
I guess they're all normal human boredom signals,
yeah,
but like...
parents who have clearly created a high expectation for their students and how they will behave, those kids, and I'm going to be stereotypical here and say females, can really get disserviced by the fact that they don't act up more when they are bored because then their needs aren't met. Whereas kids who create a behavior problem, their needs get met because they're preventing others from learning. So it's an issue that teachers need to be aware. You could have bored students who aren't displaying huge, lavish issues, but are just as bored.
And recognizing it either way is important. This is a good topic, I think, because it seems like it's just a behavior issue, I guess. Like, oh, well, how do I control behavior in my classroom so that kids don't act bored? No. Because the boredom is an important signal that one way or the other, learning isn't happening.
Correct.
Either they're bored because they're not learning because they already know it, or they're acting like they're bored because they're not learning because it's not working.
Right. A good kid will sneak a book, and a naughty kid will sneak, well, not naughty, but like a kid...
We know what you mean.
...will sneak their phone or games or distract others or pick at things and destroy them slowly over time.
Who doesn't value following the rules as much as a kid who does value following the rules.
Right. A rule follower will display boredom by reading, but it could also just display that they're like not wanting to engage in the learning. So how do you tell the difference in between the kid that acts like they're bored because they already know it versus the kid who acts like they're bored but really they're just disengaging with the learning and they don't know it?
I asked the questions here. How do you tell the difference between a kid who's not engaging because they're bored and not engaging because they just don't want to learn this way?
Having constant access to pre-assessments.
Pre-assessments. We talked about that before.
We did. And so we're just going to refer to the pre-assessment podcast because the key is these have to be performance assessments. And you're just going to want to seek out that podcast if you want to know more about how to get genuine data on And for the students to
Seek
know.
it out probably in the liner notes of this podcast he commits Johanna to doing.
Okay. All right. I will do that.
There you go.
So
That's good professional podcasting there.
now we're going to assume that you as a teacher and your students know the difference in between who was just acting bored versus who was like they genuinely already know what you're teaching. And that's why they're bored.
Because the pre-assessment told you they shouldn't really be struggling with this.
The pre-assessment told you they already, like, they might be missing a few bits of information, but that
They're not
information,
really learning that much.
No, they're not learning that much, and they can learn it really quickly. It is another kind of key component. Sometimes people are like, well, they only knew 80% and they didn't know the 20%. But yeah, how quickly do they learn that 20% is also kind of a key component.
Sure. So we're in that category.
We're sure we're in that category, and we're not currently worrying about the fact that a kid was close to that category but wasn't, because there's more podcasts to come, or we've switched over to the assessment podcast to learn how to even figure out who those kids are.
Yeah, we're in that category.
In that category. Now, you have to give them access to the learning as fast as possible.
Give them access to, what is the learning?
Whatever you're teaching.
Do they not already, do you have it locked away somewhere, or like, what does access to the learning mean?
Well, it depends how you're teaching, but as a general rule, as a teacher, we have this like, I do, we do, you do, or I'm going to give you the learning in chunks, and then I'm going to let you review it in chunks. And these kids that already know so much, they don't need nor want that, and they are going to be bored by that.
By what?
By slowly giving them access to the learning so that they don't become overwhelmed.
Oh, okay.
That isn't working. They're bored.
Throw content at them.
Throw it at them.
Here's the content.
Faster than you think they can handle it.
Got it.
Now, teachers are going to say, how do you do this?
Tell them to go to the library and read something.
I do it through flipped learning. And so my students have access to video content because a lot of times they need to see me doing something. If you teach a class where students need to actually see you do a lab, or see you create a product, or see you draw something or sculpt something, or whatever it is, the kids have to, or it's hear you play something, you're going to have to get creative about getting them access to that. The easiest way to do it is just to start recording you teaching students. And then that way for the next year, you'll have the information you need. Because kids are smart enough. They can fast forward. They can, if you put it on YouTube, they can double time the speed. Let the kid worry about that component. You just need to make sure they're getting access to the information. If you teach a book with a textbook, it's simpler. You tell them to go in the back and you want them to read the entire chapter. Just don't sugarcoat it small. Make them dive into the deep end, and then let's see if they can swim.
As an aside, I find the kids watching YouTube videos on fast speed very creepy. That's like my old man thing is like, no, you're supposed to watch it at the speed it is. I don't want you like absorbing it faster like you're some sort of robot. It bothers me.
Really?
Yeah.
Doesn't bother me at all. Kids put me on fast speed all the time.
Well, I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I'm saying it's, as an old man, I feel like the pitch should be higher if it's going faster. It's confusing.
Basically,
Hopefully no one's listening to this at fast speed right now. You should slow down and listen to it at the speed it was meant to be.
Oh my gosh, you are an old man.
Probably on vinyl. Do we put this out on vinyl?
We don't.
Oh, we should think about that. Because you get that natural sound that...
Oh, my word.
It's warmer. It's not cold ones and zeros. Anywho.
So,
okay, you threw a bunch of content at them, and you said, well, that might be tough in certain classrooms, but like, I'm no education scientist, but like a math classroom, for example, it shouldn't be that tough. Because you just have whatever lesson was today's lesson, there's tomorrow's lesson, and there's stuff out, like you just keep turning the pages in the book, right?
For the most part, you just keep... It's harder in classes where they physically have to watch you do something.
But I'm saying other classes,
but
you can just...
other classes, what you're going to do is you're just... Look, you already had the pre-assessment data that says that they're learning whatever you're teaching on day 1 and 2. So,
they know.
With the exception of a couple of things. So you're going to let the kid go to the back of the room and you're going to let them learn it as fast as they possibly can. And then you're going to have them take the test or the post-assessment early.
Yeah.
Super early.
But for real? Or
yes.
For practice?
Well, if it goes poorly, let's say you took 2 days and you said learn as fast as you can on your own, which we currently have a lot of talented and gifted teachers who are stressing out about the fact that I'm saying that talented and gifted kids are learning on their own in the back of the room because they'll say that's bad practice. But just stick with me, talented and gifted teachers. We're getting there. So you have them learn in the back of the room on their own the current content that is currently on the test. Then you're going to have them take the test or the post-assessment, whatever it is. If they bomb it, or let's say they get a B, they essentially do the exact same they did on the pre-assessment. No harm, no foul. They are now back in with the regular class. They aren't going to be as bored because you're going to have evidence for them that we tried and you weren't able to teach yourself. And so our only choice is to have you learn with the class.
It's like weightlifting.
What do you mean?
You gotta go to failure or you're not really doing anything.
Ooh, yes, it is like that.
So you gotta find the point where you can't actually do one more rep at that weight. And that's where you need to lift at.
I'm nodding because this is a very good analogy.
It's really hard to be engaged when you think you know everything already. So you got to make them feel their failure.
You got to make them feel their failure, or they're going to... Teachers think what they're going to see is failure, and then they don't. I don't. I'll get kids that want to ask a million questions because they're nervous about failing. And I'll just say to them, you can either do what the rest of the class is doing and then I can answer all your questions, or you can email me your questions. And I'll say that to a 4th grader.
Yeah.
Email me your questions. I'll get back to you, or I'll pull you aside at a different time and get back to you, but it's not going to happen right now. And so what do you want to do?
With a 4th grader, you probably have to, instead of email, they don't know what that is.
Yes,
so
they do.
Tell them to tag you on your Spotify story.
Well, we have Google Classroom, so it's a little easier to...
Kids these days.
Can't
send a proper email,
This is all by invitation and choice. A kid at any point could be like, nope, I want back in the regular classroom, and now you're not going to have a bored kid.
Yeah, that's winning. You win either way.
You win either way.
Either they're just cramming down content and learning and moving to a point where they're actually learning, or they're realizing that there's actually stuff to be engaged in the mainstream content.
Yes.
Either way is a victory.
Either way is a victory. Okay, so now let's say you've had 3 class times where, and maybe more, maybe less, depends on how you structure post-assessment times. Because you're doing this post-assessment by post-assessment. It's not necessarily the same kids. That's the whole point. So now your regular kids are starting to do things where you've done the I do, you've done the we do. Now they're starting to be more independent. All your other kids are more independent. And now you have time for high expectations and creating challenges where they can work as a team.
You sort of have times because it's periods of time, right?
Okay.
That's what you meant, right? Is that there's going to be points during the class period where you're free to
you're going to
jump around and engage with different subgroups.
Yep, you're going to have 3 to 5 minutes. You might even be able to structure it where you get 10 minutes. But now, and I will say it's really helpful. This is hard if you literally only have 1 kid in a class. If I have 1 kid in a class...
Having 2 to kind of pace themselves with.
The perfect number is 3.
Yeah.
If you have 4, I break them into teams of 2.
Yeah.
They're independently learning in the back of the room, but they can talk with each other. You're kind of going under that assumption that you've created all that stuff I talked about in the first 10 episodes. We learn as a team. We support each other as a team, blah, blah, blah. So now they've already passed the test. You have the data that you need. Their scores are already high. Now it's bonus time. And because they will be they will be on fire. Like I wish I could show you a picture of these kids. Their eyes just are huge. It's like their pupils are dilated and they are like, what's next?
Yes.
They're super excited. Because if they weren't excited, they rejoined the class and they're now not a problem. And so now you have to have really high expectations and a really huge challenge that they might fail at. And that's okay because it doesn't influence their grade.
Failure, but without punishment. I don't know.
So
a way to, again, you got to get to failure or you're not making any gains.
Yes, but kids would still rather read their book than do what you're going to share with them, potentially. So here's a couple of tricks. One, reach outside yourself. Your district or your school probably has a talented and gifted teacher. And if you give them lots of time, they will help you create whatever this challenge is. They might actually help you implement whatever this challenge is because you now have evidence that you are servicing a talented and gifted population for this one area, right? Like talented and gifted teachers, the way that the funding works is they can't just work with all kids, but depending on your state, as long as there's evidence that a kid is needing talented and gifted services, they can work with that subset of kids.
Sure, yeah.
So even if they aren't in your classroom, they might help you design or create something. Or they might be the audience for the work that your students are doing because you need that audience to be outside the classroom. In my experience, I found that gets the biggest bang for the buck.
Right.
Even if it's like...
Otherwise, it's just an exercise.
Even if the audience is like, we're 9th graders and what we create is going to be shared and submitted to the 10th grade teachers. Or it's going to be shared or submitted to the principal, or it's going to be shared and submitted to someone at a local community college, or we're 5th graders and it's going to be shared with the social studies teachers at 6th grade. And even though it's just an email and the teacher's barely going to probably look at it, the kids will interact with the learning differently if you hype it up that it's not you're not their audience.
Right.
The audience is someone different.
Because then it's performance rather than just exercise.
Correct.
Got it.
And if you have the time, you can even make an element of this, the kids having to figure out who their audience member is, like someone in the community. Like let's say they're doing something science-based, reaching out to a local physician and have that be their audience, or veterinarian, or, that can really amp up.
Yeah. So, like, what would I do with the physician or veterinarian?
Say, like, we're working on a project about blah, blah, blah. We would like to...
What's blah, blah, blah?
Whatever Okay, let's make something.
Chemistry?
Sure. We would like to submit our findings to you for review and feedback.
Okay. So, like, what kind of chemistry thing are you going to do?
I don't know. I don't teach chemistry. Okay, but it's connected to the learning. And it's an extension. It's the thing that if you had magical time for all the kids to do something with the learning, but you never do, what they would do.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say we are learning about... Let's say we're learning, we haven't done an art example. Let's say we're learning about how to do portraiture. I've given a pre-assessment and all of these kids have already shown that they have a high aptitude for drawing a face. So they've gone through the learning, they've gone through it quickly on how to accurately draw things they didn't already know. And now, rather than having them do a self-portrait, we're going to have them set up a commission where they're doing a drawing of someone for someone.
Okay.
let's say it was English and students were trying to develop mood and theme in their writing. And their pre-assessment showed that they already had the capability to do this. You had them do some reading and some analyzing of pieces to see how other writers created mood and theme. And now they are going to write theirs, but they're going to submit theirs for a contest.
Okay.
So it's probably extremely similar work to what your other students are already doing, but the audience has changed. And because the audience has changed, the work quality will change and the depth of the knowledge needed or skills needed will change.
Because essentially what you're doing there is applying stakes where there weren't any before, because the normal stakes in class is, will I get a good grade?
And that's already been established.
But you've already won that battle, and so there's nothing left. There's no stakes left.
Right.
But by creating this performance piece of it and an external audience, you're giving stakes back to those students.
Yes.
Because it's not just an exercise anymore. It's a way to have, something good or bad happen depending on how well you do.
Now, if you're like...
Without saying, well, I'm just going to grade you on a curve or something. Like, you're not going to get an A because you were capable of doing more or something.
Yes. Now, I'll give you another trick because teachers might be feeling like, well, I don't have time for all that, Johanna. So let's say you really need them to do what every other kid is doing for the application component. Then you have them compete against other kids you have in different class periods or another teacher's kids. And then you can make it like an exercise, like a war game exercise.
Okay.
So every day kids have to open a new envelope that gives them a new component. Let's say there are 3 envelopes and they have to pick one, and then each envelope is a scenario of what happened to them. So let's go back to that English teacher. Let's say that the students submitted their work and now they've drawn an envelope, and the envelope says, your editor has found that they can publish your piece, but your word content has to be cut in half.
Oh, okay. Neat.
Or you just had, so there's 3 envelopes, the kids pick an envelope. The person contracting this portrait just came and looked at it, and they said that the nose was all wrong. It needs to be redone. And so you throw these life challenges at them that, like if you're a business class, you say, well, your lease, you just got to notice that your lease is going up by 50%. Or whatever it is, and so that's causing them this extra. They're constantly having to modify their creation, even if their creation is the same as the other kids.
It's a good exercise. Because
they'll have more time for it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Is it recap time?
I think so. Hopefully, do you feel like we've left enough nuggets and specifics for people? Because that was our feedback.
I think people are going to want more specifics.
Oh, shoot. I tried.
This is a good topic to keep coming back to because just one of your key visions, I think, is this pre-test, post-test paradigm and letting kids have a pace based upon how those tests go, right?
Yes.
So I'm not sure we can talk about this really too much. But this is probably enough for one digestible podcast segment.
Oh, I know. I do have one thing I know people will ask. What if kids take the post-test and then they don't get a good grade and they want to rejoin the class, but now they would retake the same test? That doesn't seem fair.
Why?
Well, they'll ask that.
Okay.
So you don't have to show the kid the test. So, let's say it's the same test. You can just tell the kid, you only got an 85%. Are you comfortable with a B? If the answer is no, then you say, okay, then you need to rejoin the regular class and...
I mean, you have to show them the test so they can take it, but you don't need to show them exactly what they got right or wrong.
No, don't show them what they got right or wrong. And then it doesn't matter that they already took the test. Now, if you have a bad test and they literally could have memorized your test, but really a test shouldn't be a surprise. What's on the test should be very evident to everybody because it's what we've been learning.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
No secrets.
Okay, now let's recap.
To some extent, the test is sometimes a sampling of what they're supposed to know, because you can't ask a question about every bone in the anatomy class. So once you've seen the test and know that it is, well, this is the bone you have to remember, and I don't have to remember all those other ones. That's an advantage. So when the test isn't covering everything, but it's sampling things, I see why you'd have a concern that even being exposed to it without knowing the answers is a unfair advantage.
In this happens in art history courses, but we can just change out the art.
So if you have a sample type,
we make it
test,
random.
Then have more questions than are actually asked in the sample.
Yeah.
So if you have a sample style test, maybe have 30 questions and then ask 10 of them and then randomize it each time you present it.
Correct.
That way they won't know that that's exactly the questions they're going to get in.
Correct. And I guess I'm also coming from the expectation that where I work and what's expected of me is that students can try the test again. Basically, they can submit additional work, show that they've improved their learning, and they can ask to reassess.
Sure, which I think is probably pretty common.
And so therefore, it's natural for me to have a version A and B. In fact, I automatically in my classroom give a version A and B so that two kids sitting next to each other don't have the same test.
Sure.
And then whoever took version A now takes version B the next time.
So valid concern, but there's ways to work around it? That's what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can even... Some teachers just write that they have a version A and version B, and it's the same test, just stapled together in different orders. I mean, I don't know.
But even that, takes away the confidence that you've already seen it, right?
You just have to make it random enough, from the kid's perspective, that they don't know if it's two different tests or, not... Let's say you have 5 units. And only 3 of them you have 2 different tests in, it won't matter that 2 of the units are the same test and just have A and B written on them because the kids will be too unsure and won't be willing to roll the dice.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
Okay. Recap us.
Recap. Sometimes students get bored because they already know the stuff.
Yeah. You started a 2-week unit, and day 2, they are
But here's
not
the thing.
engaged.
You know they already know it because you pre-tested.
Yes.
See the link in the podcast notes.
Correct. I need to figure out how to do that.
Oh, it's going to be great. What to do with those? There's another way that kids can be acting like they're bored. But that's not what we're worried about here. This is pretest says they already know it, and they're either acting bored like they're disinterested, or they're acting disruptive because they're disinterested.
Correct.
So what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
You're going to throw more content at them.
All the content they need.
Yeah. Keep going like weightlifting until they failure.
Overwhelm them with the content. Just give it to them all at once. Even if you need them to actually do something, here are all the assignments I need you to do. Here's where you get all of that learning to do those assignments. Let me know once you've got them all turned in.
Yep.
Great.
Then use the post tests, and either they got it or they don't. Either way's a win.
Either way's a win.
The post test says they learned something or they already knew something and they can move on to more content. Great. That's what learning looks like. they taste failure a little bit and they can go back and actually engage with learning again.
And failure for them might be a B. Sometimes kids, when they do learning by themselves, will get a 95% and then they'll want to rejoin the class. And you kind of have to be like, well, look here, Sonny. An A is an A, and you just taught all this to yourself by yourself. We probably don't need those 5%.
The marginal benefit of going back and relearning something that you already knew is just to get a higher number.
Like, unless they're on the border of an A versus an A minus, but these tend to not be the kids on that border.
Sure.
Okay.
And then you're going to give them some sort of external audience or challenge such that they're not just exercising, because the grade is no longer part of the consequence. They need a performance for an outside person or another teacher or something to give them a reason to do their best.
Correct. Yes. And it could be that they're doing a task almost exactly the same as their peers. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to reinvent.
But instead of performing for the grade, they're performing for the audience?
Correct.
And then you said 3 is the magic number.
3 is your magic number.
Ideally,
Groups of 3.
Ideally, you've got groups of 3 students that are all around the same pace.
Correct.
2 works.
2 works.
1 is a little hard.
1, they'll probably decide to rejoin the class, but at least they had the choice.
Sure. That's still better than nothing.
Yes. If you get more than 5, then it becomes really challenging as a teacher, because now they're probably going to need behavior help, because now you're going to have 2 groups. And now we're starting to get into trickier territory. That's going to have to be a whole new podcast.
Well, great. Spoilers alert for future podcasts.
When like a third of your class, a fourth to a third of your class needs this, now you really have to change how you're teaching everyone. But we're assuming that you're meeting the needs of almost all your students, and you just have this small little subset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question though.
Yeah.
How do you know when to just give more content and post tests and such, and how do you know when to keep them in the mainstream but give them the outside performance challenge? What's the difference in when and why?
Okay. For me, I used the cutoff of 80%. If they could score essentially a B on the pre-assessment, then that meant they had enough basic skills and knowledge that they could teach themselves the other 20%. But a math teacher might not have that cutoff. A math teacher might say they need to be more like at the 90% range. You know, you could have a social studies teacher who might have a lower cutoff because they don't know the information, but they understand how to analyze history from different perspectives. Or so that's kind of a teacher decision, and theoretically a PLC decision.
But bottom line, there's some metric from the pretest tells you when you're ready for self-learning versus just directed learning, but with a different consequence.
Correct.
Okay.
And I give them I'll give them a goal. You need to complete X amount of work during this time while I'm teaching everyone else, or you're going to need to come back and rejoin the group.
Yeah.
I mean, but generally, it is extremely rare for me to do this and have a kid either not tell me up front, I just want to be in with the regular group, or just not just go with it. I mean, you can't get out of their way fast enough. They're like a Gisele.
A Gisele?
I think
so. They marry Tom Brady?
No. What's that? The animal that goes very fast with the little legs.
Gazelle.
Gazelle. They're like a gazelle.
Gisele marries Tom Brady. And sorry, I don't want to sell her short. She's a successful fashion icon and model in her own right.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Gisele Bundchen.
I don't know who that is.
Gazelles are the animal on the hooves that run very fast.
Okay, so it could be the same learning, and the way to make it interesting for the students, if it's the same like anchor activity, is to just have those daily challenge envelopes. They're very easy to make up, and then you just have 3 the kids choose from. They pick one, or you have 2 they pick one.
It's
the
like
choice thing. The choice thing means that it's not personal. Like they're not angry at you, and some of them can be good things, and some of them can be bad things. And then if you have like 10, you just mix them up, and they choose a new 3 every time.
It's like hard mode in a video game. It's like turning the skulls on in Halo.
Again, I don't know what that means, but I'll just smile and nod.
The same basic game, but then like a bad thing is happening that makes it harder.
Okay. Yes.
Like maybe your shield doesn't regenerate.
So you can have the same learning, just an audience member from the outside, or a competition with other kids from the outside. And then you have this daily challenge thing, which can make it more interesting.
Well, we did it. We solved boredom.
Solved boredom.
That's done forever.
Done.
All right. Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Johanna, do you get questions from listeners ever?
Yes, we do.
How do those listeners send you questions?
They send us an email.
Where does that email go?
teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
But wait, what kind of 4? How do I do 4?
All of the 4s. They can do a number 4. They can write the word FOR, or they can do FOUR, even though that one doesn't quite make sense.
Well, perfect. teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
Yes.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life.